You know, when we talk about crime, there's one thing pretty much everyone agrees on. We want our communities to be safe. We want to stop crime before it happens again. But what if our most basic gut instinct about how to do that is just completely wrong? What if trying to be tough on crime is actually making us all less safe?
So ask yourself this. What's the best way to make sure someone who committed a crime never does it again? For a lot of us, the answer feels really obvious, right? It's just this instinctual feeling we have about justice and what people deserve.
And right here is where we hit a massive paradox. Our intuition, our gut, tells us that if you make prison a miserable, harsh experience, it'll scare people straight. But decades of solid research, it tells the complete opposite story. The evidence is overwhelming that punitive, harsh conditions actually make people more likely to reoffend, while a humane, rehabilitative approach is what really protects the public.
Okay, so let's dig into that first part. Why does the tough-on-crime approach, which sounds so logical on the surface, actually end up failing so badly?
Here's the key thing to understand. Prison isn't just a timeout corner for adults. It's an active intervention that fundamentally changes people. And the data shows that. Way too often, that change is for the worse. The experience of being in prison can itself become a direct cause of future crime. There's actually a specific word for this.
That word is criminogenic, which literally means crime-causing. And just think about that for a second. It's a pretty shocking idea, right? That the very system we built to stop crime can actually become a factory for creating more of it. So, how does that even happen?
Well, it happens through what researchers call the pains of imprisonment. I mean, think about it. You lose all control over your life, your purpose, you're cut off from your family, from any positive social connections. You're often surrounded by violence, which starts to feel normal. Society sticks this criminal label on you, making it almost impossible to get a job or a place to live when you get out. And on top of all that, you're basically in what's been called a school of crime, where you can learn how to be a better criminal from others.
And when we take this whole punitive idea to its absolute extreme, the data is just chillingly clear. You put someone in the harshest environment possible, like a supermax prison, and you don't crush their criminal tendencies. You feed them. They come out more likely to commit another crime, and specifically, a more violent one. It's a total backfire.
So, if making prisons tougher and more miserable is a recipe for disaster, what's the alternative? Well, the evidence points us toward a radically different philosophy, one built on humanity. This idea is the foundation of the Norwegian prison system. They call it the principle of normality. And the idea is actually really simple, but it's profound. The punishment is the prison sentence itself, losing your freedom. That's it. Nothing more should be added on top. The goal is to make life inside the prison as much like normal life on the outside as possible, because how else can you prepare someone to successfully rejoin it?
And you know what? The results, they kind of speak for themselves. This chart shows recidivism, basically the rate at which people get rearrested after they're released. In the US, with its more punitive model, you're looking at more than 3 out of every 4 people getting arrested again. But in Norway, it's just 1 in 5. The difference in public safety outcomes is just staggering.
This really gets to the core of the whole debate. The things that some people might call luxuries, like education, mental health care, job training, they're not about coddling people. They are the single most practical, evidence-based, cost-effective tools we have for public safety. They are investments that pay off with fewer crimes and fewer victims down the road.
So if we agree that rehabilitation works, then the question becomes, how do you do it right? Because this isn't just about wishful thinking. There's a real science to it, a blueprint for what actually makes communities safer.
The gold standard in this field is something called the Risk-Need-Responsivity Model, or R&R for short. It's pretty straightforward. First, the risk principle. You focus your most intensive help on the people who are at the highest risk of reoffending. Makes sense, right? Second, the need principle. You have to target the specific problems that are actually driving their criminal behavior, things like addiction or antisocial attitudes. And third, the responsivity principle. You have to deliver the treatment in a way the person can actually hear and absorb. One size definitely does not fit all. And here's the proof. This graph might look a little intense, but the takeaway is super simple. It's looking at different treatment programs for high-risk individuals, and pretty much every single one of them reduces reoffending. The evidence is clear. Treatment is a powerful tool, especially when we focus it on those who pose the greatest risk to public safety.
And this next chart illustrates that need principle perfectly. Again, don't worry about the tiny details. Just look at the trend.
What this shows is that the more root causes of crime a program addresses, the more effective it is. As you go from left to right, programs are targeting more of those problems, and look what happens. You see this dramatic drop in reoffending. It proves you have to treat the disease, not just the symptoms.
Now, to make all of this stick, you need motivation. That's where something called the Good Lives model comes in. Instead of just focusing on stopping bad behavior, it's a positive approach. It helps people figure out what a good, fulfilling life actually looks like to them, with a job, family, community, and then gives them the skills to get there. Legally, it makes a life of crime basically incompatible with what they actually want for themselves.
So at the end of the day, we're left with two very different paths, two ways of doing things. Each path eventually releases a person back into our communities, but the kind of person who walks out is shaped entirely by the system they just left.
From the punitive system, we get someone who is often more psychologically damaged than when they went in. Their trauma, their addictions, they're still there, untreated. They might even have picked up some new criminal skills. They walk out into a world that sees them as an outcast. And, statistically, they are more likely to be angry, hostile, and to reoffend violently. This person is a greater risk to public safety, period.
But now, let's contrast that with the person who comes out of a rehabilitative system. Their core issues, like addiction or mental health, have been treated, they have job skills, they have positive ways to cope with stress, they have a real, viable plan for a good life that makes going back to crime seem pointless. This person isn't just better off, they are demonstrably, measurably less of a threat to all of us.
So, when you look at all the evidence, you realize this debate was never really about being soft versus tough. It's about being smart versus not. It's about what actually works to create fewer victims and safer streets for everyone. The science shows us the way. So the question isn't whether we can afford to be humane, it's whether we can truly afford not to be.